Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to confidence when starting and growing your business. Do you love what you do enough to do it for free? Many people would probably say no, and that's understandable, but our guest in this episode of the Merri-Cast is Bobby Dutton, and he sees life differently. His entrepreneurial ventures are deeply rooted in his sense of purpose and passion. His first business, GBM6, was rooted in his passion for music and is all about making people happy through legendary events. His second, called Think Like a Pilot, came from his passion for flying and is all about the desire we all have to feel both freedom and control in our lives. Everything that Bobby says and the way he says it can't help but make you smile. His enthusiasm is infectious, and the time you spend listening to his podcast, I promise, will leave you feeling the same way. Bobby has such a great story to tell, and so I started by taking him back to the roots of his passion. Here we go.
So the young Bobby was somebody who liked to push buttons and ask questions and understand how things worked. But I was always big on things like airplanes and technology and big, loud, awesome, emotional things too. So I've always been kind of drawn in both directions. But as I got into what would later become my first big business, it was about one of the most interesting places where technology and emotional impact overlap, and that's concerts. So when you think of big events and people, huge crowds of people getting really excited and engaged, that was an interesting thing to me, and I wanted to learn how can I use technology to create an emotional impact, particularly in the space of concerts. And my first foray into that area was DJing. DJing was such a cool way for me to be the tech guy and the performer and the businessman and the sales guy and the brainstorm visionary. It was all at the same time. And at the end of a big project, I'd be in the spotlight, smashing buttons, using technology and making people happy. And that was just quintessential me at the time.
Where did that passion come from then? Had you sort of grown up with music around you and that was kind of imbued in you, or did you find it somehow?
Yeah, I mean, I was always, I wanted to be in the theater in high school. I wanted to audition to be in the play, but I also wanted to know what that guy in the shadowy room in the back of the auditorium was doing with all those buttons. So I was seeing tech and events and carving out my own traction to that space. And it all just, in hindsight, of course, it makes total sense. But at the time, it was a strange and interesting adventure.
And so you were doing this, and were you at that stage thinking about it as in an entrepreneurial sense, or were you just thinking, I love doing it, I don't care what it pays or how I do it, but I just want to do this? What was the sort of thought process at that point?
At first, it was definitely just, I'm excited about this. I'm passionate about this. I feel like this could be my purpose. I want to do more of it. I want to get better at it. I want to think about it and explore it. Sure, if money and a career comes later, that sounds great, but that was definitely not what drew me there. I didn't sit down and say, how can I be profitable? Oh, DJing is an interesting idea. Let's be honest, most DJs don't make money. And for a long time, I certainly didn't either. So I think that's an important piece, was passion and purpose first.
Okay, so and passion, they say that there are two important days in your life: the day you're born and the day you find out why you were born. And
yeah,
so it sounds like you found that sort of early on. So how did that lead to in the late 90s you set up GBM6? Did I get that right? A business you talked about as making people happy through legendary events, which I love. Just tell me a bit about how it came to that moment, if you like.
Sure. So the big thing was, I identified a market that hadn't yet been created, and that was what made this a real business opportunity. I was DJing small events at first, but I could see that whether this was in a fraternity basement for university students or a middle school dance, the musical freedom was interesting. The fact that I was playing the right songs to bring people together in an interesting way was great. And what I noticed was the biggest DJ show that I was aware of was much smaller than the smallest concert that I would consider a real concert. And that was this gap. And I said, why? There are things about the DJ show that are better than these concerts, but there's no in between. And so my whole thing was I wanted to say, what if I could take everything that was great about a good DJ party and combine that with everything was great about a real concert and play whatever music I want for the people on a $4 million sound system in crowds of not hundreds, but thousands and tens of thousands. And I thought there could be this super party that no one had really played with all that much, specifically on a temporary event basis. So we wanted to build something that was the best of both worlds, and that became the basis for GBM6.
And what was it like in the early days? So you had this idea, this sort of vision, and were you sort of describing this and people immediately saying, that's a great idea? Or did you have a sort of process to go through? I mean, like people maybe eyes glazed over and they weren't quite understanding what you were saying. Just take me through that. Was it a hard slog or was it an easy sell?
Very much a hard slog, an uphill battle to be sure. I would make this pitch to colleges. That to this day is my key target demographic. And when you try to talk about a concert to anyone, whether they're someone who you'd like to buy a ticket or someone you'd like to book the whole show, their first and sometimes only question is, who's the artist? That is the center of this concert design conversation. And I had no good answer for that because the whole point was this is some kid that's been DJing in a frat basement. You don't care about them. You don't value them. They're talented. The music's going to be good, but the music that we're bringing is all of the greatest artists in the world. So they're not going to be here, but that's okay because especially in this increasingly digital world where people want variety and people want the best of the best, I was arguing that I can bring you 200 songs squeezed into a 90-minute set from the greatest music, but let's first talk about the show. Let's build this for the students, for the audience, let's focus on the technology. But the technology for the people I was trying to sell to was never really the center of the conversation. So they were confused. They said, I don't get it. You want lots of money to bring more speakers and lasers, but you don't know who's going to be on the stage? I was like, I know this sounds confusing, but I've done it a few times and it's going to be amazing. And so at first I had to find a few people to trust me and to take a chance on this model. But very quickly I realized there was potential here because we would do a show and the immediate feedback before we were even done that night, they would say, I get it. This all makes total sense. I'm sorry I doubted you. When can we do this again? Not only next year, but I want to do it again in 6 months. And so for 10 years, we had 97% retention. So we knew the model was sticky. It worked, but that doesn't mean it was easy to explain it to someone who had not yet experienced it.
I mean, that's fascinating. So there was a bit of a hard slog involved in sort of selling the idea. I mean, do you remember any conversations early on where, somebody who might be financing it was saying, oh no, this will never catch on? And I mean, were you ever downcast about that? I mean, did you ever have any doubts, or were you just kind of resolute the whole time? Did you have little moments of doubt yourself?
I mean, everyone has moments of doubts, especially when you're doing an experiment and putting all your chips on it. So I remember, at first, this was not a profitable company like most companies. And I had to work. I was a computer engineer by trade, and I had to go into an office full of cubicles and write code for the government for 5 years while I was doing this on the side and the nights and the weekends and not making a dime for it. And I remember when I put in my notice at the Cube job that was, paying me regularly and a nice bit of stability. And I said, I need to give this more focus because I think if I invest more time and energy into this, it's going to go somewhere. But yeah, that was not a sure thing. And I remember walking out into the parking lot of the cubicle job saying, oh, geez, I hope I could pay the rent next month because I just gave away the one thing that could definitely provide it.
And what were those first few months like then? I mean, were you able to pay the rent? Did you surprise yourself with sort of resilience, or did you find that bit, the operational side of business, difficult to get your head around as well?
I wish I could tell you the finances were easy and great the whole time, but the truth is, I had to live very frugally for a long time. The first person I hired on payroll was not myself. I hired a general manager because I knew I was invested in this financially and emotionally. I would do the work either way, regardless of whether I was getting paid for it. So by paying someone else first, now I have two people instead of just one. So that was tough. And, I've heard an interesting entrepreneurial quote that says, it's all about living for a little while like nobody else will, so that later you can live like nobody else can. And 20 plus years in, I'm definitely seeing that start to be the case.
Okay, that's brilliant. Now you've said that I think GBM6 is all about shared experiences. I mean, what does that mean exactly? I mean, in a practical sense for the people who come to the shows.
Sure. Well, if you look around, life for all of us is pretty digital these days. One could even argue we've crossed a tipping point where most of our input and engagement happens through a screen or a computer or a phone. And that's great because it means that world has become very capable. I can listen to the perfect music as soon as I get in my car. I don't have to choose it. I don't have to know who this song is by. The world can give it to me for free and figure it out. And that's nice. The downside of all this digital connected world is we are less connected to the real world around us, to the people sitting right next to us, to the place we're participating in. And there's something kind of sad about that. And I think a lot of people feel that, yes, we have a ton of support and connectivity. And yeah, I can find a recipe instantaneously. I can get inspiration from an incredible speaker right now. Like it's all at my fingertips, but I'm a little more lonely and a little more disconnected as a result. And I think that's a bad thing. So that just means if we can create an experience in the real world that does compel you to be present in the environment around you and connected to the people around you together, that's sacred because it's not something we experience most days anymore. So it's a sad thing that this is so necessary, but a very valid need that we're trying to fulfill. So I love the idea of looking around at some of the best moments during our best events. If I can look around and say there's thousands of people here and none of them are looking at their phone, we have given them something that they think is better than all of the rest of the insane amount of information and entertainment at their fingertips. This is where they chose to be. And there's something really special about that.
I absolutely agree with this. I mean, and also there are things that can bridge generations as well. You know, recently, I mean, I live in St Albans in England, and we have a magnificent cathedral where they decided to do a silent disco. I know that's not quite the sort of events that you're doing, but across the generations, you know, there were people in there and they're listening to it, and they're all there. You know, they've got the experience of the magnificent cathedral, and they're there all sharing something, even if they're listening to different tracks. And so I get that. I know, but that's not quite what your events are. Tell me about a typical event that you would run. Is there a typical event, or is there no such thing?
Well, we're very specific about our why. Our mission is what matters. So if it's to make people happy and it's a legendary event and it tends to be technical, you know, with a lot of moving parts and high tech electronics, then it's in our wheelhouse. Before COVID, I would have said, yes, it's about making people happy. And yes, that's the model. But we're pretty much a concert production company. That's the what we generally deliver. But I mean, COVID was transformative for us, like for everybody else. And the events industry was one of the hardest hit by far. So we were, you know, in March about to go into a huge spring with 20 major concerts at colleges. And of course, they all absolutely stopped. So we lost 70% of our 2020 in the first 5 weeks of COVID, which was hard to get through. But happiness was in more desperate demand than ever. So even though events per se were not viable, happiness was something everyone needed and everyone was desperate to figure out a way to find. So we got creative and we said, okay, if we're a happiness company, we can build legendary. Yes, there's restrictions. Yes, 10,000 people in a room sounds like a terrible idea right now. So we won't go there. But some of the first events we brought back were really interesting dream sequences where you're wandering through in tiny groups of safe people and you're just seeing stuff that you haven't seen in a while. We figured out how to make something in person that was compelling and inspirational and could deliver on happiness creatively. So the challenge, of course, was serious through that time, but we came out of it with a lot more confidence in who we are because we are the team that can figure out how to engineer happiness for college students, and that was huge.
I mean, you're using we a lot and so on, but I mean, just to put some sort of quantity on that, I mean, so how many people are in your team at the moment?
We've got about 5 people on our core staff, and we have about 5 interns at any given time. So there's 10 of us in the group, and then we work with vendors and student volunteers. So on a given event site, we'll have something like 30 or 40 people working at a time.
Okay, and some of these guys were there during the pandemic when obviously they were probably very worried about what was going to happen. So you, as the leader, had to. You said you had to sort of be creative in that situation. I mean, what was your sort of dominant emotion in that? Was it fear of what might happen, or was there an exhilaration of new possibilities? I'm just interested in, because we all went through daily ups and downs about that whole thing. I'm just interested in how you got through that as a leader, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty for sure. But I think once we got through the shock that the spring we were expecting was not happening, we banded together and we learned to focus on what we could control and what was important. And I was very honest with the team. I said, listen, there's $0 coming in for the foreseeable future. So I'll pay what I can, but I need you to understand that, like, I don't have a pot of gold that can get us through 5 years of this without any work or projects. So they knew that, they trusted me, and we worked on together how to figure out how to stay viable and how to get these events to work. And a lot of us had other projects going on. This was when I said, okay, regardless of financial stability, I need something to do. I don't want to sit here and watch Netflix all day every day for months and years. That's, even if I can afford it, that's not where I want to be. And so this is where some of my pilot stuff started to come into play, because airplanes were something I had loved for my whole life. And it had nothing to do with my job, or so I thought. But this might be a contingency plan. Maybe I'm going to be a flight instructor once we get through COVID. I don't know. Maybe this events company is not going to survive. I hope it does, and we're going to work on making it work. But something I can do that gives me purpose and focus and makes me feel successful is leveling up my ability as a pilot. So during COVID, I spent a ton of time studying alone and taking practice exams. And once we were allowed to be near other people with a mask on, I did a bunch of flight tests. I ended up getting my instrument rating as a pilot, my commercial license as a pilot, my advanced ground instructor license, and my certified flight instructor rating. So that was a huge piece of how to get myself into that challenge and flow and purpose.
And just as there was a passion for the music, I mean, this business, second business called Think Like a Pilot. So you started off learning, just thinking, I want to be a pilot, or did the business idea come first? Was it chicken and egg? I mean, how did it work? What came first?
I've been a pilot for a long time, since about 2005. I got my private license, so I can go up and fly around in circles or take a friend somewhere and do short little day trips. And that's always been my happy place. And I feel when I go flying, what I love about it is its complexity is such that I can't be distracted. If I'm stressed out and have 12 tabs open on my screen or 100 tabs open in my brain, everyone's overwhelmed, myself included. But if you're in an airplane and you've got to keep somebody alive and move hundreds of miles an hour, thousands of feet off the ground, you can't afford to be distracted by anything. And so that has given me a really great ability to hyper focus and prioritize. And I've always loved that just as a person. And what I started to realize the more I started to think about flying was that this has affected the way I manage people. This has affected the way I lead. This has affected the way I calendar and think in general. And so in 2020 was when I said, okay, I've had some thoughts about aviation benefiting the average people on the ground and business folks as well. Let's explore this. Let's formalize this. And that's when I had time to invest in making this a real thing. And it was such a fun journey.
So just to understand that then, I mean, the kind of the immediacy, as you said, you can't be distracted when you're flying a plane for obvious reasons. But in bringing that, to, I don't know, your team or maybe to other clients and so on, what are you bringing? Are you bringing that, you're bringing that hyper focus, you're almost simulating that intensity of focus in what you're doing. Is that the theory behind it?
In a nutshell, the Think Like a Pilot product is all about learning how to prioritize and basically acknowledging the fact that we're all stressed and we're all overwhelmed, but it's not because we have too much to do. It's because we don't know which things are important. And that, I think, is a universal truth that we can all relate to. And I could notice that, I do a lot of networking and I'm a big part of industry organizations and associations and volunteer boards. And one thing I always see when you see someone that you haven't seen in a while and you say, hey, how are you? They always say how busy they are. Always. They don't say I'm great. They don't say I'm successful. They don't say everything's really good. They say, oh, just crazy. Oh, so much going on. And there's this myth that we have all normalized that stress is success. And if I imply to you how stressed out I am, what I'm really telling you is everything's amazing because I have so much demand and conversations that clearly I must be successful. But that's not true at all. And I love to push back on that and point out that if a pilot sounded stress, you'd be worried, right? We joke about how pilots sound when we're boarding a flight and they get on the intercom and they sound bored, and we all make fun of this cliche pilot voice, and they say, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be flying at 38,000 feet to get you down to Fort Lauderdale. Should take about 4 hours, 22 minutes, local weather, blah, 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 whatever. This is fine," right? And what if that pilot sounded like this? "Okay, guys, listen, I've got so much going on. There's like a million buttons up here in this cockpit. The engines are going, so that's fine. But like the tower's asking me if I need to depart soon. I'm getting all these questions. What if one of the engines fails? Oh my God. Like that's not how pilots operate. And if they did, it would never work. We wouldn't have thousands of flights successfully delivering us everywhere we need to go all the time." And so that's the key, is we need to learn what is going so well for these pilots that they sound almost bored, even though the task they're working on is so much more high stakes and challenging than the ones that are burying us in a 1,000 emails and text messages and notifications. So we need to learn how to get a little more bored sounding. And that's when real focus and real success and real visionary thinking can start to happen.
So just to be clear then, this isn't about creating an illusion of calm. It's about creating genuine, calm, focused prioritization that's making, so it's not about a kind of painting an image. It's actually really being like that.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. And so what sort of, you've taken this out to businesses. So is this essentially coaching then, or how would you describe it?
Right now, it's mostly keynote speaking. So any live conference or educational trade show, that sort of thing, when they want to get everyone a universal message that can benefit everyone in a way that gives them a totally new perspective on things, it can be really refreshing. So I know people aren't trying to learn how to fly airplanes at most of these conferences, and that's okay. But I do know that they're all feeling overwhelmed and would like if they felt less that way. And I just love the idea of, for all the conferences I've gone to, when I look down the list of sessions or keynotes and speakers, they're all the same, right? It's all marketing in a new generation and how to connect with the Instagram culture. And like, these are all valid things, but they're all part of the things that are overwhelming us because they're always on our mind already. And if you saw Think Like a Pilot and you're not a pilot, you're at a dental conference, you might just say, that's interesting. I'm willing to pause everything and open my mind to what this person has to say. So in 1 hour, I can really shake up people's perspectives and help them realize how important it is to prioritize.
Okay, and this message obviously resonates with people. Have you had what sort of feedback have you had from your various talks?
People love it. They love the chance to think about things from a totally new perspective. They learn to call themselves out on when they're sounding busy, and they've learned that busyness and stress are not the same thing as success and thriving. And they've learned how to challenge that. They've learned that pilots see stress as a hazardous attitude and a problem that needs to be solved. And more tactically, the takeaways have to do with how to manage your time proactively, how to build your calendar in a way that really reflects the way you want to go about your day or week. And that does get to that mindset of actual calm and presence of mind. And the best thing is I'm very busy. Like I do have lots of things to do most days and most weeks, but they're the right things in the right order, coming up at the right times, so that, yes, I can navigate this flight of my day, if you will, in a way that's predictable and successful. And the best part is, if I get to Friday afternoon and I've checked all the boxes, I think I've got more done this week than most people do in a week. But now my brain is calm. And now I can look around and say, how are you doing? Or what do I want to do right now? Like the empty gaps are actual peaceful moments that most people never get to experience anymore.
Do you think that some people then are uncomfortable with the gaps? They, in a way, when you ask them that question about how are you, and you go, busy, and doing things that they've never known anything other than that kind of mode. And there's an adjustment really to being comfortable with the fact that you may have got all your tasks done in the day, and you, because you're being very calm and clear and prioritized. And is there a sort of secondary level of discomfort of people who are just so used to that rat race that they don't know quite how to deal with something much better?
Definitely. I think there's a entrepreneurial understanding that hustling is the goal, and hustling may be part of the journey. You have to do the work and get it done and burn the late night, midnight oil, whatever it is. But hustling is not the goal. And at the end of the day, if it is for you, great, because it's very easy to get that hustle stress mentality. But I would urge people to see what's on the other side of that, what that success feels like once you've done the hustling, got the result you aimed for, and now you're done. So what do you do? And I think that those gaps are definitely uncomfortable. And I see, a lot of people, social media is a common black hole for all of us, right? And I do it too. I like to scroll Instagram and see what's going on, but it's important to remember that these social media platforms are major companies whose full-time job it is to keep me on the phone. And so sometimes I see something that's great. Sometimes I'll laugh, I'll share a joke with someone, I'll see an interesting, message that I do value. But the problem is the time suck, right? A lot of people have no idea how much time they spend on social media every day because social media companies are good at their job. And some of the people who feel so busy all the time and don't get enough rest and don't spend enough time on the things they want to, they don't realize that they did spend 6 hours scrolling Instagram that day. And I'm not saying Instagram's terrible, but it's hard to be intentional about it. And it's important that you figure out how to do that. So I've definitely called myself out on it and said, I'm not even sure how long I've been sitting here, but it's time to move on. Like there's diminishing return on the scrolling right now. It's time to put it down. And I'm the only one that can decide to take that step because Instagram's not going to help me.
Yeah, and I would recommend anybody. I did this, during a recent holiday. Sort of starts to monitor how much time they are spending on social media. And obviously, you can do that on phones these days, and they're actually giving you information sort of actively about that, and it is quite alarming. And so I've so far on my return from holiday managed to sort of cut that down quite a bit. And what a difference suddenly, to exactly the area. Say now, you're the founder of two businesses, so are there synergies between the businesses you use? I mean, I can obviously see a mentality in terms of thinking like a pilot and applying it to GBM6, but I mean, are there any other things that you can sort of do, or do you treat them as two completely separate things?
We do manage them as two very separate brands, but there is definitely a lot of carryover. And I think that the key common element is creative thinking. And I love that if we're talking to a new school that maybe they could use some help on their concerts because they haven't been going well, or they've been doing concerts the old traditional way for decades, and they could use some new thinking on it. I love that we know we can help them reinvent their concert, whether it's a DJ show or an artist show, but with some, attendee focused design behind it. But before we convince them on that, because we know that's a hard sell for someone who hasn't seen it yet, I love that I can just say, why don't we come in and give you an hour of professional development and just teach you how to think and teach you some of the pitfalls of what to look out for in life with stress and yes, with concerts. But now we have a relationship, we have a dialogue, we can build some trust. That costs us very little because for me to think at you for an hour is something I'm very comfortable doing, as you're seeing. But for us to come and say, yeah, we'll come and buy you lunch and we'll talk to your student leaders. And I want to understand what your challenges are. Let me try to apply some of this creative thinking and pilot thinking on your life, on your programs, on your events. And yes, if that leads to a profitable annual event that we get excited to work on together, great. But I also enjoy the fact that we can push a speaking product as a separate thing that's relatively easy to deploy.
Okay, and in terms of more generally being an entrepreneur, it comes with many challenges. You already talked sort of quite candidly about what what's happening during the pandemic, but in terms of more like everyday challenges, are there things that you feel you're especially good at, and also, if you don't mind, are there things that maybe your team would say he's not very good at that? I'd just be interested in things that where you recognise your own sort of strengths and weaknesses, and what you've done to sort of try and mitigate the latter, if you like.
Sure. I think my biggest challenge as an entrepreneur was to learn how to compartmentalize and let go of certain things and delegate. Because the beginning of the DJ business, I was selling the shows, I was building the stages, I was performing, and I was doing the meetings and the management and everything else, which was great. And I'm proud of that. And that's certainly what help put us on the map in the first place. But fast forward 20 years, I've got people whose job description says they're in charge of these parts of it. And it's easy for me to micromanage or say, I have thoughts on this because I was the one that did this alone 10 years ago. And I'll always remember asking my production manager, this was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. We were at the end of a show. It had been a very long day. It was going great. And I was exhausted. I had something else going on the next day, or maybe I wasn't feeling great. And I went up to him and I just said, hey, if I wasn't here, how would you feel? And his response surprised me. It was, I don't know what you're doing here in the first place. This is my job. It's just making it harder because everyone wants to ask you questions when you just have to give them to me because I'm the one that has to do it. He respectfully told me to get out of the way. And that's when I learned the biggest lesson of all as a leader is sometimes the best way to manage people is to make sure they have the support they need, but then get out of the way. And that's been great because as I'm experimenting with this Think Like a Pilot brand and trying to see how it fits into the world and how it's viable, that's given me some purpose-driven tasks to focus on while the team works on something else. They've got a show tomorrow and they've got snow to deal with and permits and vendors and power. And I don't really know where they're at right now. I trust they're on top of it. And I know if they needed help, they would call me, but it's not my job. And it took 5 years for me to realize that it's okay that I don't know every little detail about it. And if it's a problem, of course, we'll get it done together. But that's hard. That's been tricky.
And was that a lesson that you had that moment that's where the guy was telling you this, but was it a lesson you had to learn a few times before that lightning rod sort of struck? I mean, where maybe you had jumped back in when you shouldn't have jumped back in and so on. So was it an iterative process?
Definitely. Definitely. I would still drive to events but not show up. I would have a coffee next door just in case they needed me to swoop in and save the day, but they never did. And so now I don't bother going and have coffee anymore. So the thing is, I still like the events. I love these events. This has been so much of my life. I don't want to sit at home and watch TV while they push cool buttons and make people happy. I'd like to see that or at least be aware of it. So now I'm better at just showing up to support and say hello. But if say, oh, Bobby, we need you to move that truck. I say, oh, like, no problem, but please talk to the production manager. He's right over there. And yes, it's taken a long time, years and years, but it's getting easier.
But this gets to quite a common feature amongst entrepreneurs, that the issue around that is that you've got great people there doing a great job. You realize that things will carry on whether you're there or not. But then a lot of entrepreneurs have this moment where they're saying, well, that's just taking me away from the thing that I've originally felt passionate about. So what does passion mean for you now? Is it the same things that when you set up the first business sort of those years ago? I mean, what does the success and the passion feel like for you now?
Sure. I would define success as freedom and control of your own time. So if you ask yourself, or if you ask somebody else, if you just had your whole calendar deleted today, if you could do whatever you want today, right now, tell me what your day would look like. And the closer your real day looks to whatever your answer to that question was, the more successful you are. And I think that's great. And so, we talked earlier about how being able to learn how to focus gives you the freedom to pay attention and be more present. And so things that I started to notice over time were I was getting up to write computer code at 6:30 in the morning. I don't like getting up at 6:30 in the morning. Most people don't. And I'm really grateful and aware that the difference now is I do still have to get up for things, and then that's okay. But I have the power and freedom to be intentional about that. And so most days I wake up naturally at the time when my body wakes up because there's coffee music playing and I want to start engaging the day. And just like that small change, when it happens every day, is massive. And that helps my happiness and purpose and ability to stay successful because I'm not yanking myself in unnatural directions constantly. And so the more you're able to adapt and proactively adjust how you flow through a day and make it look more like your natural rhythm, the more able you are to be both productive and successful. And I think that's really important.
So looking ahead then, I mean, is there something that's happening right now that you're particularly excited about that's kind of on the horizon for you, either in the two businesses that you have, or maybe there's another one, I don't know. But I mean, just tell me, is there something kind of at the fuzzy edge now where you're thinking this is what I'm going to be doing in 2025 that you're able to tell me about?
Sure. I think both. I think the whole DJ product, when we asked the question, and this was decades ago, we said, what if a DJ show could be bigger than your biggest concert? That went great and it worked for a long time. I think the world is finally ready to ask that question on their own, because what's changed with music over those 20 years, people are finally realizing that when I book one artist and spend all my money and put all my eggs in that basket, this concert's not going to be the one that people want. They're going to come to me, and they're starting to come to me and say, have you ever thought about making a DJ show huge? And I'm just like, yeah, I sure did. A really long time ago. We did it many times and it was super successful. And we've got videos and we know exactly how to run that playbook. I think we're going to see an organic demand start to rise up on its own for kind of a full circle moment where we're producing concerts just the way we used to in 2004 and earlier, because they're less skeptical about whether that would work, because people now say, of course I want 200 artists, and of course I want to listen to Taylor Swift and these huge names that I can't afford to pay them to be here. Yeah, I think a DJ show with tons of visuals and lasers to bring people together in this digital age where there's hardly ever a reason to come together, that's something everybody wants now, and we're uniquely prepared to deliver it at a level that nobody else can. So I'm excited for that organic demand to finally catch up to what we were envisioning so long ago. And then on the other side with Think Like a Pilot stuff, similarly, I think the message of needing to conquer stress and needing to learn how to prioritize to get some more control over your own time and mind, I think that's a message that people are very much ready for. And I'm excited to see that demand start to materialize as well. And personally, I'm excited to visit a bunch of events that the events team at GBM6 is working on and see that happiness being actualized and being proud of the team for making it happen. And I'm excited to keep the Think Like a Pilot keynotes going. I'd love to be doing 2 or 3 keynotes a month and traveling and seeing what new challenges and ideas come up on the journey. I think that would be kind of my perfect day. And I'm starting to get to the point where it's looking more realistic.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. So take yourself back to the young Bobby who was just setting up, that business. Now, what advice would you give to someone who's thinking themselves here in 2025 now about becoming an entrepreneur and who's taking their first steps? I mean, what sort of advice would you give them? Would you give them any advice, or say you've got to find out for yourself? I mean, what would be that conversation? I'd just be interested to know that.
First, I would say, before you ask if it can be profitable, ask if you love it enough to do it for free. And I've seen a lot of entrepreneur ideas and they mention some random market opportunity they've identified, and they might be right. And they tell me how they think it could work financially. And I say, that's fine. And maybe you're right. And if you are, great. It sounds like it maybe could generate money, but are you ready to make this your life? Like everything on your mind when you're awake and when you're asleep, and regardless of when the money starts to flow, because it may not flow for a while. So yeah, ask if you love it enough to do it for free. Second, just to reiterate, the hustle is not the goal and stress is not success. Both of those are inevitable parts of the journey, but they're not the destination. Another one is learn to self-manage. I think the hardest part of being your own boss is being your own boss. So like we talked about before, people hate those gaps. So if I woke up tomorrow and didn't have any deadlines or time-sensitive things I knew I needed to take care of, what would I do? What would my day look like? And what could I do to stay productive and generate the results I want and work towards the vision I had? Because filling up an empty calendar by yourself without somebody telling you what to do is a really hard skill, and those gaps can be hard to navigate. And finally, establish key metrics and track them. So I manage, for myself, I do a check-in every week where I just ask myself to rate from 1 to 5 how I'm doing personally, professionally, and physically. And I can usually figure out what I need to be focused on to get happier if one of those is low. So sometimes you just feel down in the dumps and you're not sure why, and that's okay. It happens. But if I can do that check-in and say, oh, I'm doing great personally and professionally, but physically I haven't been outside in 2 days, like I'm going to go for a walk. Sometimes it's that simple, just to hone in on the weak point and target it as something you need to build on. And then I do the same thing for the team. I ask the team every week, how happy are you? How stressed are you? And how full is your plate? And by having these real numeric data to review, I can see trends, I can identify problems, and I can define success by the numbers so that when it's not working, I know it first and I can do something about it.
So thank you to Bobby for being such an amazing guest. After talking to him, I just couldn't help but feel great. And those messages Bobby gave at the end are so clear, aren't they? Do you love it enough to do it for free? It reminded me of that phrase about passion, that the two best days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. Bobby enjoyed two of these why moments and took full advantage, and now every one of us needs to find ours. Then there's his message that hustle is not the goal and stress is not success. I'm sometimes guilty of that one, and I hope that we'll all learn from Bobby's wise words on that. Then he talks about the most difficult thing about being your own boss is being your own boss, and it can be lonely starting a business, and so you need Bobby's combination of calm and sense of purpose to make it work. And then finally, for that, maybe you need a flight deck, and I love Bobby's simple personal, professional, and physical metrics, easy and quick ways to check in on yourself and others. So thank you to Bobby, and thank you to you, our growing band of listeners. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or our business Merrible Media, you can find us on LinkedIn. So don't forget to join us for our next episode. And until then, thanks for listening.